Everything in Battlefield 1 seems to be on a massive scale, and rightly so given the setting of World War I. The clue's in the name really, it's a war that affected the entire world. Whilst the pretty eye candy, the expansive maps and the large scale destruction are all the centre of attention, Battlefield 1 is also full of tiny little details that tie up the whole experience, like the neat little bow atop a present. Here's a few of my favourites. In Battlefield 4, doors got upgraded a little bit coming from Battlefield 3. Rather than being stationary within the map, doors became interactive, so that with the push of a button, players could open and close doors to their heart's content. That functionality is still here in Battlefield 1, but it's had a couple of tweaks made to it. You can now simply sprint towards the door, and your character model will bring up his arm to shoulder barge the door open. This makes it much more easy to escape from a firefight you know you can't win when you're fleeing for cover, as it means that you're not having to fumble around mashing buttons to open the door. It allows you to concentrate on what your next move's going to be, rather than focusing on pressing a button. That, and I'm just a lazy person, so keeping my pinky above sprint is much more desirable than moving my index finger to E. You must be sprinting for this animation to trigger, so if you walk up to it you'll just press up against it, which can be useful if you want to look through the windows of the door rather than expose yourself by looking through the larger windows. Enemy players are less likely to be looking for enemies through the windows of the door than they are through the proper window, so this is likely going to be a pretty good tactic until it catches on that door windows can be seen through. Just be careful when approaching doors you don't necessarily want to open. I had a couple of times where I ended up in the street rather than pressed against the door because I forgot about the mechanic, and it got me killed a number of times because it caught me off guard. I'm not sure whether there was actually an option in the settings menu where you could turn this off, but it would be a nice feature to add if it were to be part of the final release of Battlefield 1. When you're running to an objective and you come under fire from an enemy sniper, hitting the Z key and diving beneath cover has to be one of my favourite things to do within Battlefield. It really gives you an epic sense of danger and adrenaline, and it makes you think about what your next move is going to be whilst you're sitting there, knowing that if you pop your head up you could get it blasted off. Whilst going prone while sprinting has had a separate animation before, crouch has never had the same love. Well, now in Battlefield 1, if you press crouch while sprinting, your soldier will drop to his knees and knee slide for a few short meters. This can be useful if you come under enemy fire and want to duck into cover, but want to be immediately ready to return fire, and trust me, when you can pull off a moment like that, it feels incredibly epic. Remember, you can still hip fire as well as ADS while sliding, so it's not like diving for cover where you're essentially vulnerable to everything around you, whilst your control over looking and movement is limited for a few brief moments. You might want to consider rebinding crouch to a separate key if you find yourself using this mechanic a lot, as I personally found it really difficult to press shift for sprint and control for crouch at the same time with the same finger. That would be one criticism that I have of the mechanic in the alpha build, so if it could be made as its own separate rebindable action, this would be a much better option in my eyes, because then I could bind it to something like an extra mouse button. Something that you might not have noticed because it's a very subtle change is that the base raping issue that's plagued the franchise for God knows how long has essentially been fixed. If you don't know, base raping refers to when the enemy team makes an offensive attack on the friendly team base, making it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for the friendly team to escape their base and play the game properly. This usually means that you end up being killed within your spawn, and your team ends up having most of its vehicles stolen. Whilst nothing much can be done about the spawn killing, the vehicle theft has been fixed. Instead of vehicles physically spawning after a timer once they are destroyed, they now become available to spawn into from the spawn menu. In other words, the vehicles only spawn when they have a player in them, so no longer can defenseless little tanks be stolen or destroyed within their own base. As I said, it's not something that you might have noticed, but it's something very subtle that makes a really big difference. DICE are no strangers to high quality audio design, and they certainly haven't skimped out on Battlefield 1. Whilst loud explosions, gunfire and weather effects take centre stage, there are also an incredible amount of smaller sounds that you might not realise were there until you actually listen out for them. Things like ricocheting bullets sounding different depending on the impact surface, the sound of soldier footfalls depending on the surface they're walking on, and how every sound changes depending on where the player is in location to where the sound originated from. To give a specific example, the sound of a weapon being fired inside will sound different to how it sounds being fired outside, and that sound will sound different to all other players depending on where they are when the weapon is fired. This is all calculated by the Frostbite engine, which takes into account the position of the players, the location of where the sound originates from, and the different obstacles in the way of the player and the sound. It's all very clever and something that you might not notice unless it was pointed out to you, but it makes a hell of a big impact upon how the game sounds when put into practice. Now this last one might seem a little strange and out of place since it seems to be one of the game's biggest marketing features, but hear me out. Yes, the destruction in this game is on a massive scale, with players having the ability to level the entire map, but it's the meticulous way that this can be achieved which I think is extremely impressive. First off, everything that you would think could be destroyed can pretty much be destroyed. It doesn't suffer from the same problem that Hardline did, where certain objects or buildings that looked like they could be destroyed actually couldn't, so destroying things in Battlefield 1 feels a lot more natural, and it'll eventually become second nature to you after playing for a bit. You can be very specific with destruction too. You can take out portions of a building wall rather than just taking out the entire building. Creating craters in the landscape is another area where destruction can be quite specific, and I think I mentioned this in my impressions video, which you can find linked below or by clicking on the little eye in the corner. When the camera zooms out to reveal the whole map at the end, all of the tiny bits of destruction add up to create a scene that represents a real proper battle that took place there. So for me, destruction was another aspect of the game that really caught my eye. And that's everything that I have to say. If you feel that I missed something, make sure to let me know down in the comments below, and whilst you're there, don't forget to leave me a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. You can also enable channel notifications over on my channel's page to ensure that you never miss out on one of my uploads or live streams. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.